How do you initialize a new Git repository? How do you stage all changes in your working directory? How do you stage specific files? How do you commit staged changes with a message? How do you open an editor to write a longer commit message? How do you check the current state of your repository? How do you view a concise list of commits? How do you discard changes in the working directory for a specific file? How do you modify the last commit message or add more changes to it? Define what a remote repository is in the context of software development. List 3 distinct reasons why teams choose to use remote repositories for their projects. Explain the difference between pushing and pulling changes in relation to a remote repository. How do remote repositories contribute to the process of continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD? Name 2 key advantages of using a branch within a remote repository workflow. Which of the 3 major remote repository platforms, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, is often associated with a strong focus on open-source projects and a large developer community? If an organization prioritizes an all-in-one DevOps platform with integrated CI/CD and self-hosting capabilities, which remote repository platform would likely be their preferred choice? A team heavily utilizes Jira and Confluence for project management and documentation. Which remote repository platform offers the most seamless out-of-the-box integration with these tools? Beyond code storage, what other collaboration features do modern remote repository platforms typically provide to facilitate team communication and project tracking? Why is having an off-site, remote copy of your codebase considered a critical aspect of disaster recovery for software projects? How do you push local commits from your local repository to the remote repository? How do you specify a branch when pushing changes? What does setting an upstream branch do? How do you download changes from the remote repository and merge them into your current local branch? How do you specify a branch when pulling changes? How do you create a complete copy of an existing remote repository, including all branches and history on your local machine? How do you list all the configured remote repositories for your local Git repository? How do you establish a link between your local repository and a remote repository located at a specific URL? Local branches when you clone a remote repository. How does Git handle merging when 2 branches have made changes to the same file in different ways? Why would you want to use Git rebase instead of Git merge in certain situations? What is the difference between a branch and a tag in Git? How does Git's branching system make collaboration easier for teams working on the same project? What happens to unmerged branches when you delete a remote branch? Why might you choose to use feature branches instead of working directly on the main branch? How does Git determine which commits belong to which branch? 1. What does the Git branch command display by default? 2. How can you see both local and remote tracking branches in one list? 3. What information does Git branch v show that regular Git branch doesn't? 4. What is the key difference between Git branch feature /new UI and Git checkout b feature /new UI? 5. How can you create a new branch from a specific commit using the Git branch command? 6. Why would you use Git switch C with a branch name that already exists? 7. What are the main advantages of using Git switch over Git checkout? 8. What happens when you use Git switch force create branch name? 9. How do you set up upstream tracking when switching to a new branch? 10. Under what conditions does Git perform a fast-forward merge? 11. What is the main difference between a fast-forward merge and a 3-way merge? 12. Why would you use Git merge noff instead of allowing fast-forward merges? 13. What is the safety mechanism built into Git branch D that prevents accidental deletion? 14. When would you use Git branch D instead of Git branch D? 15. How can you delete multiple branches in one command? 1. What are the 3 main conflict markers that Git inserts when there's a merge conflict? 2. Why does Git prevent automatic merging when conflicts occur? 3. How can you identify which files have merge conflicts after attempting a merge? 4. What happens if you don't resolve all conflicts before committing a merge? 5. What is the difference between Git checkout theirs and Git checkout ours? 6. Can you use Git add on only some of the conflicted files, or must you add them all at once? 7. How can you abort a merge operation if you want to start over? 8. What are the advantages of using a visual merge tool like Git Merge Tool over manual editing? 9. Why might someone choose to resolve conflicts by accepting changes from their current branch instead of the merged branch? 10. How does Git determine which lines in a file have conflicts when there are multiple conflicting changes? 11. What is the proper sequence of commands to complete a merge after resolving all conflicts? 12. What are some strategies for minimizing merge conflicts during collaborative development? 13. How can you use Git diff to better understand what changed in conflicted files? 14. When would you prefer to resolve a conflict using Git checkout, theirs over manual editing? 15. What is the purpose of the Git reset merge command? 1. What is the main difference between Git rebase and Git merge in terms of commit history? 2. Why is it dangerous to rebase branches that have been pushed to a shared remote repository? 3. How does the commit history look different after using Git rebase compared to Git merge? 4. What command would you use to perform an interactive rebase on your last 3 commits? 5. What are some benefits of using rebase for feature branches before merging into main? 6. When might you want to avoid using rebase and instead use merge? 7. How can you check if your branch has been rebased from the main branch before merging? 8. What happens to commit messages when you perform an interactive rebase with the squash command? 9. Can you explain what git rebase I_3 does? 10. What is the purpose of using git push forthwith after rebasing a shared branch? 11. Why might you want to use rebase to keep your feature branch up to date with main? 12. What are the risks involved in rebasing commits that others may have already pulled? 13. How does Git determine which commits to replay during a rebase operation? 14. What happens if there are conflicts during a rebase operation? 15. Can you rebase a branch that has already been merged into another branch? 1. What is the main purpose of Git stash, and when would you use it? 2. How does Git stash pop differ from Git stash apply in terms of stash management? 3. What happens to your stash changes if you run Git stash pop multiple times? 4. Can you have multiple stashes at the same time? How do you manage them? 5. What is the difference between Git stash save and just Git stash? 6. Why might you want to use Git stash branch instead of Git stash apply? 7. What are the potential risks of using stashing in a collaborative environment? 8. How can you see what changes are included in a specific stash without applying it? 9. What happens to your staged and unstaged changes when you run Git stash? 10. Can you apply a stash to a different branch than where it was created? 11. What should you do if you encounter merge conflicts while using Git stash pop? 12. How can you see the full patch content of your stash changes? 13. What is the benefit of adding descriptive messages when saving stashes? 14. What happens to a stash when you successfully apply it with Git stash pop? 15. Why would you use Git stash show p instead of just Git stash show? 1. What is the primary purpose of Git cherry pick, and when would you use it instead of merging? 2. How does cherry picking create a new commit compared to other Git operations like merge or rebase? 3. Can you cherry pick a commit that has already been cherry picked into your current branch? What happens in such a case? 4. What is the difference between Git cherry pick ABC 1234 and Git cherry pick ABC 1234? Guy 9012. 5. How do you resolve conflicts that occur when using Git cherry pick? 6. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using cherry picking in a collaborative environment? 7. When might you use Git cherry pick N, and what is its practical application? 8. What happens to the original commit when you cherry pick it into another branch? Does it get removed from the source branch? 9. How can you see which commits have already been cherry picked into your current branch? 10. What is the purpose of using Git cherry pick M with a custom message? 11. Why might you choose to cherry-pick specific commits rather than merging entire branches in a feature workflow? 12. How does Git cherry-pick handle commits that were made on different branches but affect the same files? 13. What is the significance of the commit hash being different after a cherry-pick operation? 14. Can you cherry-pick commits from a remote branch? And if so, how would you do it? 15. What are some best practices for managing cherry-picked commits in your project history? 16. When using Git cherry-pick with multiple commits, what happens if one commit fails due to conflicts? 17. How does the sign-off flag work with Git cherry-pick, and when might you use it? 18. What are some common mistakes people make when using Git cherry-pick? 19. How can you undo a cherry-pick if you realize it was applied incorrectly? 20. In what scenarios would you prefer using Git cherry-pick over creating a new branch and merging specific changes? 1. What are the key differences between lightweight and annotated tags in Git, and when would you choose one over the other? 2. How can you create a tag that points to a specific commit hash instead of the current head? 3. What happens to existing tags when you push new tags to a remote repository that already contains those tags? 4. Can you create multiple tags pointing to the same commit, and what are the implications of doing so? 5. How do you handle tag conflicts when multiple developers try to create the same tag on different branches? 6. What is the difference between Git push origin tags and pushing individual tags? 7. How can you view detailed information about a specific tag, including its commit details and tagger information? 8. What are some best practices for naming conventions when creating Git tags for releases? 9. How do you manage tag cleanup in a repository with many tags, especially in large projects with frequent releases? 10. Can you tag commits that are not the latest in the current branch, and how does this affect your repository history? 11. What is the purpose of the sort equals version option when listing tags, and how does it work with different versioning schemes? 12. How do you handle Git tags when working with a distributed team where multiple people are creating releases? 13. What happens to annotated tag messages if you rebase commits that contain those tags? 14. How can you automate the process of creating version tags in your CI/CD pipeline? 15. What are the security implications of using signed tags, and how do they differ from unsigned tags? 16. How does Git handle tag deletion when working with submodules or nested repositories? 17. Can you create a tag that references a specific commit in another branch, and what are the implications? 18. What are some common mistakes developers make when managing Git tags, and how can they be avoided? 19. How do you merge or transfer tags from one repository to another? 20. What is the difference between Git tag, D, and Git push origin, ref/tag/tag name in terms of removing tags? 1. How do you create a gitignore file for a new project, and what are the essential patterns to include? 2. What is the difference between using and in gitignore patterns, and when should each be used? 3. How can you ignore files that have already been committed to Git before adding them to gitignore? 4. What are the best practices for organizing a complex gitignore file with multiple patterns and exceptions? 5. How do you handle gitignore files in nested directories, and what happens when a parent directory ignores a child directory's contents? 6. Can you ignore specific files within a directory that is ignored by a parent pattern, and how does this work? 7. What is the difference between folder and folder patterns in gitignore, and why does it matter? 8. How do you debug gitignore rules when files are still being tracked by Git? 9. What are some common mistakes developers make with gitignore files, and how can they be avoided? 10. How do you handle sensitive data like API keys or passwords in a project that uses gitignore? 1. What are the key differences between forking and branching in Git, and when should each be used? 2. How do you keep your forked repository synchronized with the original upstream repository? 3. What information should be included in a well-written pull request description to facilitate code review? 4. Explain the process of resolving merge conflicts that occur when trying to merge a forked branch back into the main branch. 5. How can you ensure your PR addresses all requirements and doesn't introduce regressions or new bugs? 6. What are some common mistakes beginners make when creating pull requests, and how can they be avoided? 7. Describe how code review comments should be structured to provide maximum value to both the author and reviewers. 8. How do you handle situations where a PR reviewer requests changes that seem incorrect or counterproductive? 9. What is the proper way to update a pull request after it has been submitted, especially when changes are requested? 10. Explain the importance of using descriptive commit messages and how they relate to the overall quality of a pull request. 1. What are the key principles of writing effective Git commit messages, and why is it important to follow these guidelines? 2. How can you ensure that your commits are atomic and meaningful for better code review processes? 3. What are the differences between Git reset soft, mixed, and hard, and when should each be used? 4. Explain how to properly handle merge conflicts in Git, and what steps should be taken after resolving them. 5. Describe the process of using interactive rebase, Git rebase I, to clean up commit history before submitting a pull request. 6. How do you handle situations where you accidentally committed to the wrong branch, and what's the safest way to correct this? 7. What are some best practices for keeping your local repository synchronized with remote changes to avoid conflicts? 8. When should you use git stash versus creating a new branch for temporary changes? 9. How can you safely remove sensitive files from Git history without breaking the repository? 10. What are common mistakes beginners make when working with Git, and how can they be avoided through proper practices? 1. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using Git GUIs compared to command-line Git, and when might you choose one over the other? 2. How does integrating Git with IDEs improve developer productivity, and what specific features make this integration valuable for daily development work? 3. Explain how Git aliases can be used to create more efficient workflows, and provide examples of useful custom aliases for common Git operations. 4. What are Git hooks, and how can they be configured to automate tasks like code formatting, testing, or validation before commits or pushes? 5. Describe the process of setting up a pre-commit hook that automatically runs linting tools on staged files before allowing commits. 6. How do different IDEs implement Git integration differently, and what unique features do each provide for managing version control within their environment? 7. What are some advanced Git configuration options beyond simple aliases, and how can these configurations improve your development workflow? 8. Compare the user experience of popular Git GUI tools like Gitkraken, SourceTree, and Fork. What are their key strengths and weaknesses? 9. How can Git hooks be used to enforce coding standards or prevent problematic commits in a team environment? 10. What considerations should developers take into account when choosing between command-line Git, GUI tools, and IDE integration for their workflow?